She was the kind of bride you didn't forget, 8 feet tall in satin and seams that strained with every breath. He was the kind of man who avoided eye contact, especially with women who could bench press a steer. But out here, in the dying gold of the prairie sunset, their worlds collided like 2 slow-dancing storms, and when the bed broke by dawn, it was only the beginning of what neither of them were ready to admit. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, whether it's a ranch, a rooftop, or somewhere in between. And if stories like this tug at your heart or make you laugh out loud, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's tale might just break your heart or your furniture. The first thing he noticed wasn't her height, it was the shadow she cast across the fence. Wyatt had seen his fair share of big skies and broad shoulders, but nothing quite like the figure standing across from him in a wedding dress. 2 sizes too small and 10 shades, too elegant for this dusty patch of earth. Her muscles looked carved from stone, arms like tree trunks beneath embroidered lace. The gown had once been white, maybe even delicate, but now it dragged in the dirt like a banner of defiance. She stood still, hands at her sides, looking at him like he was the one who didn't fit. Wyatt didn't know what to say. He'd come to fix a broken gate, or at least, that's what the letter said, handwritten, formal, sealed with wax, like something out of an old storybook. Help needed, fencing, urgent. No signature, just coordinates and a promise of payment. He hadn't expected a bride, and definitely not one like her. "I'm too big for this dress," she said finally, her voice deeper than he expected. Warm, steady. She glanced down at the strained fabric and then back at him. "But I paid too much not to wear it." Wyatt blinked. It's nice," he offered, instantly regretting it. A corner of her mouth twitched. "You always this smooth with women?" "No, ma'am." The wind picked up, kicking dust around their boots. He watched as her gown flared, revealing worn boots underneath. Not heels, not slippers, but proper working boots, the kind you'd split logs in. She looked at the fence, then back at him. "You here to fix this?" "I thought I was." "Then come on." She turned without waiting, her long braid bouncing like a rope down her back. Wyatt hesitated. The dress, the muscles, the way she didn't flinch when she looked at him, it was all too much. Or maybe just enough. As he followed her along the fence line, he noticed how careful she was not to step too hard, as if even the earth beneath her deserved a little kindness. She pointed out the posts that needed resetting, where the wire had gone slack. He nodded, trying to focus, but the truth was he was dizzy, not from heat, not from hunger, but from something harder to name. When they reached the final post, she stopped and turned. "You ever met someone like me before?" she asked. Wyatt cleared his throat. "No, ma'am." Her eyes softened just a touch. "Good. Means you don't have a reason to be afraid." Yet, he laughed nervously. And to his surprise, she did too. A real laugh, loud and full like thunder rolling off the hills. The sun dipped lower behind them, and for a moment, the fence didn't seem so broken, and neither did he. Wyatt didn't expect dinner. He'd brought jerky in his saddlebag, and figured he'd be back on the road before nightfall. But as the last wire was tightened, and the post driven in, the bride straightened up with a satisfied nod and said, "You'll stay for supper." It wasn't a question. It was the kind of sentence you didn't argue with, not because it was forceful, but because it felt like a door swinging open. The farmhouse was modest from the outside, sun-bleached wood and a crooked weather vane spinning slow in the breeze. But inside, it was warm, lived in. The walls bore dings and scratches like an old friend's hands. The kitchen smelled like something halfway between cornbread and roasted garlic, and Wyatt's stomach, traitorous and loud, growled before he could stop it. She heard it, of course. "That a yes? I'd appreciate it, ma'am." "You can stop with the ma'am," she said, untying her braid and shaking it out. "My name's Grace. If you call me ma'am again, I'll assume you're talking to my mother, and she's buried out back." Wyatt swallowed. "Grace, then." She moved through the kitchen like someone who built the room herself, strong hands working with surprising gentleness as she sliced thick cuts of smoked meat and dropped them into a sizzling pan. He sat at the table, feeling small, not just physically but existentially, like a guest in someone else's story. "So what brings a quiet man like you all the way out here?" Grace asked without looking at him. The meat hissed as it browned. "Got the letter. Needed the work." He hesitated, then added, "Didn't expect a wedding dress." That makes two of us," she said, chuckling softly. "Figured if I waited for someone to marry me, I'd be dead by the time I wore it. So, I decided to stop waiting." Wyatt nodded slowly. "You always wear it for fence repair?" "No," she said, plating food onto tin dishes that looked like they'd been used by at least 3 generations. "Just on days I meet strange men from town." He flushed. She noticed, of course, and didn't let him off the hook. "You always this quiet? When a woman feeds you?" "Only when she could break my spine with one arm." She raised an eyebrow, then smiled. "That's fair." They ate in relative silence after that, save for the clinking of cutlery and the occasional low sound of approval from Wyatt. The food was hearty, thick potatoes, greens sautéed in fat, meat cooked to perfection. He couldn't stop eating. Every time he thought he'd finished, she pushed another ladleful onto his plate without asking. It was hospitality disguised as dominance, or maybe the other way around. "You got a woman?" she asked mid-bite. Wyatt nearly choked. "What?" "A woman. Back home." "Someone waiting on you?" He shook his head. "No one waiting on me anywhere." Grace tilted her head. "Good. Means I don't have to feel guilty if I make you sleep in the barn." He blinked. "I thought you were offering a room." "I was," she said. "But you keep looking at me like I'm either gonna kiss you or kill you. And I haven't decided which one I prefer." He froze, unsure if it was a threat or a joke. But the corner of her mouth twitched again, and her eyes softened. "You're not what I expected either," she said after a moment. "That letter? I sent it to a dozen men. You're the only one who showed." Wyatt set his fork down. "Why me?" Grace didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, the wood creaking under her, her massive arms folded across her chest. "Maybe because you didn't flinch when I opened the door. Or maybe because you didn't stare like I was a freak. Or maybe—" She paused, her voice dropping. "Maybe because you looked like someone who's been hungry a long time. Not just for food." Wyatt didn't know what to say. His stomach was full, but his chest felt like it had opened up without warning. Grace stood then, collecting plates with one hand. "I'll make a bed for you." "Not mine. Yet." And with that, she turned and left him sitting at the table, full of questions and roasted potatoes, wondering what kind of meal he'd just had, and what exactly he was still starving for. Wyatt awoke before dawn, the barn still dusky with sleep. The cot creaked beneath him, though, thankfully, unlike the joke Grace had made last night, it hadn't collapsed. Straw stuck to his shirt, and the morning chill bit at his fingers as he laced his boots. He could hear the soft clinking of tools somewhere outside, steady and rhythmic, like someone splitting wood with a song in their head and nowhere to be. He stepped out into the cold just as the sky began to purple. There she was, Grace, splitting logs in her wedding dress. She had thrown a flannel over her shoulders, but it hung loose and open, the corseted bodice still beneath, laced tight around muscle and strength. The axe in her hands moved like it was weightless, slicing through thick rounds of pine with the ease of a butter knife through bread. The sound echoed across the empty land. Crack, thump, breathe. Crack, thump, breathe. He stood there longer than he meant to, watching her, spellbound. It wasn't just the sheer power of her movements, it was the grace, ironically enough. The contradiction of lace and labor, of how she wiped sweat from her brow with the hem of a skirt that had likely once cost more than most folks' fences. She saw him, of course. "You sleep light, or the cot gave you splinters. Bit of both," Wyatt said, stepping forward. "You want to help?" she asked, not slowing down. He nodded. "Yeah, I do." She handed him a smaller axe without comment. It still felt heavy in his hands. She watched how he gripped it, adjusted his stance. "You ever split wood before?" "A few winters," he said. "Good. These'll bite back if you don't show 'em respect." He nodded again, then lined up his first swing. The log cracked cleanly down the middle. Grace gave an approving grunt. Not bad. They worked in silence, but it wasn't awkward. It felt like an understanding, an unspoken agreement that not all words needed saying. The rhythm of it took hold, the labor warming them as the sun rose. Eventually, she leaned against the stump, watching him, arms crossed over her wide chest. "You ever wonder what people see when they look at you?" she asked, suddenly. Wyatt hesitated, breath misting in the air. "All the time. I used to think folks saw a monster," she said, voice lower now. "Too tall, too wide, too loud. So I stopped trying to be smaller for them." Wyatt set down his axe. "What do you think I see?" "I think you're still figuring it out," she said. He nodded. "That fair." She pushed off the stump and walked over, close enough that he had to tilt his head back to meet her eyes. "But you didn't run. That counts for something." He opened his mouth to reply, but no words came. She smiled at that, just barely. "Commande. You earned breakfast. I don't serve grits to cowards." As they walked back toward the house, her towering stride beside his quiet one, Wyatt realized something had changed in the span of a few chopped logs. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was something stronger than curiosity. It was the first chip in a wall neither of them had realized they'd built, and for the first time in a long while, Wyatt found himself wanting more than just work. He wanted to stay. The moon rose high before Wyatt realized how late it was. Supper had been quieter this time, less teasing, more glances that lingered just a little too long. Grace had cooked again. This time it was chilly, thick and spicy, with cornbread so soft it crumbled in his hands. She didn't push seconds on him like before, but he helped himself anyway. That seemed to please her more. After the dishes were cleaned and the oil lamp flickered low, Wyatt stood by the doorway, unsure. "You can sleep inside tonight," Grace said, wiping her hands on a towel. "I fixed up the guest room. I don't mind the barn." She tilted her head. "I do." There wasn't much to argue with in her tone, so he nodded and followed her up the creaky wooden stairs. The guest room was simple, clean sheets, a quilt with a faded sunflower pattern, and a single bed that looked like it had been made for a much smaller man than him, let alone someone like her. She leaned in the doorway as he sat on the edge. "You ever think about why I wear the dress?" He looked up, surprised by the sudden vulnerability in her voice. "I thought it was to scare people off." She smirked. "Sometimes it works, but that's not why." She stepped into the room and sat beside him, the mattress groaning under her weight. "I wear it because it's mine. Because I bought it for a wedding that never happened. Because it reminds me I still get to choose what kind of woman I want to be." He nodded, unsure how to respond. "Most men don't get that," she added. "I think I do," he said quietly. "I think you wear it because it's your armor." Grace turned toward him slowly, her shoulder brushing his. "And what's yours?" Wyatt hesitated. "Not talking too much. Keeping busy. Never staying anywhere long enough for someone to see through it." She reached out, brushing a bit of straw from his sleeve. "You're not hard to see through, Wyatt." He swallowed, throat suddenly dry. "Is that bad?" "No," she said. "It's just honest." There was a beat of silence between them, thick with unspoken things. Then she stood, all at once, rising like a mountain. "Well," she said, patting the quilt. "Try not to break the bed." Wyatt blinked. "Why would I?" But before he could finish, she turned toward her own room and shut the door with a wink. Later that night, the old bed creaked once, then again. Then it gave way entirely with a groan and a loud crack that echoed through the farmhouse. Wyatt cursed under his breath, tangled in sheets and shame. The door opened moments later. Grace stood there, her silhouette framed in moonlight, lips twitching with suppressed laughter. "I warned you," she said. "I didn't do anything." She stepped closer. "Then maybe it's just not used to holding something real." She left him there speechless, sprawled, and wondering what exactly had just broken. The bed? Or something else entirely? The sun rose slow the next morning, stretching amber fingers through the cracked window panes of the guest room. Wyatt sat on the floor beside the broken bed frame, his back against the wall, knees drawn up. He hadn't gone back to sleep after the collapse, not for lack of trying. Grace's words had echoed louder than the splintered wood. Then maybe it's just not used to holding something real. He wasn't sure what she meant. Or maybe he was. And that was the problem. When he finally stepped into the kitchen, Grace was already there. Not in the dress this time, but in work pants and a flannel shirt rolled to the elbows. Her braid hung damp over one shoulder, a fresh sheen to her skin, like she'd already been out chopping wood or wrangling the day into submission. She didn't turn when he entered. Coffee's hot. Cups are by the stove. He poured himself one, fingers brushing the handle of a tin mug that looked like it had seen more sunrises than he had. About the bed. You didn't break it, she said flatly, wiping her hands on a dish towel. It was already cracked. Been meaning to fix it for months. He sat slowly at the table, unsure whether to believe her. She finally looked at him, then nodded to the porch. Come on. They stepped out into the morning chill, breath misting between them. She handed him a slice of cornbread wrapped in a cloth napkin and leaned against the railing, gaze fixed on the horizon. The land stretched quiet and golden, as if it too was waiting for them to say what needed saying. Grace broke the silence first. I sent that letter because I was tired of being alone. Not just for the work. I needed to know if someone out there would show up. Wyatt looked at her, surprised by the crack in her voice. I didn't expect you, she went on. Didn't expect you to be kind, or funny, or still here. He swallowed. I didn't expect you either. She glanced over. Then why are you? He paused. Then quietly, because no one's ever made me feel like I belonged anywhere. Not until I got here. Grace's jaw flexed, like she was chewing on a thought too big to swallow. You don't have to stay, Wyatt. This place, this life, it's not soft. It's not normal. I'm not normal. I don't want normal, he said, surprising even himself. I want something that doesn't make me feel like I'm pretending. You don't pretend. I like that. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she nodded, slow and certain. All right. They stood in silence a while longer, sipping coffee, letting the wind speak between them. I'll fix the bed, he said eventually. Grace smirked. I was thinking we build a new one. Their eyes met. And in that quiet agreement, something unspoken passed between them. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of something more dangerous. Hope. The new bed came together slower than the fence had. Not for lack of skill, Wyatt's hands were sure, and Grace's were stronger than most tools, but because neither of them wanted to rush it. They measured twice, sometimes 3 times, not because they didn't trust the numbers, but because the pauses gave them more time in the same space. More time to look without being caught, to speak without saying too much. Grace sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting nails into neat little rows on a cloth. Her dress lay folded over a nearby chair, replaced by denim and a white tank smeared with sawdust. The sunlight through the barn window caught on the sweat along her collarbone. Wyatt forced himself to focus on the frame. You said this life ain't soft, he said, aligning the boards. But what was it before this? Before the land? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she hammered a nail into a support beam with a single swing. I used to sew, she said finally. Wyatt blinked. You? Yeah, she said, looking up with a small smile. Made dresses, corsets, even did embroidery on gloves. My mama was a seamstress, taught me when I was little. He nodded slowly, picturing her hands, now calloused and thick, holding a needle instead of an axe. What happened? Life happened. Her smile faded. Pa died. Mama got sick. I took jobs where I could, hauling, logging, freight. Started growing out, filling in. Folks stopped asking me to make dresses. Started asking me to move wagons. Wyatt leaned against the beam, You ever miss it? Sometimes, she said softly. There's something peaceful about threading a needle, stitching something delicate and making it whole again. Out here, everything's just survival. There was a pause. Then she added, I still keep my old threads. In the chest, under the stairs. Even if my fingers are too thick now. Wyatt looked down at his own hands, rough, nicked, silent storytellers of places he barely remembered. You didn't run from softness, he said more to himself than to her. It ran from you. Grace met his gaze. There was something tender in her eyes then, something that made his ribs tighten. What about you? She asked. He hesitated. Grew up on a ranch. Small one. My brothers did the talking. I did the mending, the bookkeeping, quiet stuff. Why'd you leave? He took a breath. Because no one ever saw me as enough. Not man enough, not loud enough, not brave enough. I figured if I went far enough, maybe I'd stop needing to prove it. Grace stood, brushing off her hands. You ever think maybe being soft isn't the opposite of being strong? He looked at her. Then down at the half-built bed. Yeah, he said. I'm starting to. She smiled then, truly smiled. No teasing, no shield, and reached down to hand him another board. Together, they laid the next piece into place. Not just wood, but trust. One beam at a time. The storm came in without warning. One moment, the sky was all golden haze and chirping crickets, and the next, it wasn't. The wind twisted up from the west, dragging gray across the horizon like a curtain being yanked shut. Wyatt was in the pasture checking the gate when he felt it shift, the sudden stillness that always came before something wild. He turned back toward the house, already moving. Grace met him halfway, with her hair loose and boots unlaced. You feel it? Yeah, he said. It's not going to be gentle. They worked quickly, moving the chickens into the coop, securing the windows, tying down tools that might turn to flying steel in the wind. Wyatt tried not to watch how her muscles tensed as she hauled a barrel to the porch. But it was impossible not to notice her strength when it moved like that with purpose, not anger. By the time the rain came, they were inside, soaked and breathless. The wind hit the house like it wanted in. Thunder cracked across the sky with the sound of a gunshot. Grace lit the oil lamp and set it on the kitchen table. The flickering light softened everything. Her face, the shadows, the space between them. Wyatt stood near the counter, arms crossed, trying to hide the chill in his shoulders. You get storms like this often? Not this early in the season, she said, pouring them both a drink strong, dark, and warm enough to burn. But I've seen worse. They drank in silence. Outside, the storm raged like it was peeling the world apart. Inside, it was too quiet. Grace broke the silence. You ever just sit still, Wyatt? He glanced at her. I try not to. She gave a soft, almost sad smile. Thought so. She walked to the window and looked out at the darkness, her reflection ghosting the glass. Sometimes I think the silence is worse than the noise. At least the wind lets you know it's coming for you. Wyatt stepped closer. You afraid? She shook her head. Not of the storm. There it was again, something thick between them. Not tension, not desire. Something more fragile. Like a truth neither wanted to name. I never let anyone stay before, she said, still facing the glass. Not really. I thought it was safer that way. Wyatt's voice was low. And now? She turned slowly, eyes locked on his. Now, I'm wondering if quiet is just what happens when you stop running. They stood there, inches apart, both still soaked to the bone, hearts louder than the thunder. Wyatt reached out slow, careful, and tucked a wet strand of hair behind her ear. She didn't pull away. The storm outside howled, but inside, something settled. Not a kiss. Not yet, just closeness. The kind you don't get back once you've felt it. Grace leaned forward slightly. Storm's not done. I know, Wyatt said. Neither am I. The morning after the storm felt like the world had been rinsed clean. Mud clung to the porch posts, and the fields were still soggy. but the sky was the kind of blue that made you forget what thunder ever sounded like. Wyatt stood outside with a hammer in hand, pretending to inspect the coupe door. In truth, he was avoiding the house, or maybe avoiding Grace. Last night hadn't ended in a kiss, hadn't crossed any obvious line, but something between them had changed. Quiet didn't feel so safe anymore. It felt full of expectation. Grace stepped out not long after, her usual stride slower than usual. She wore her work pants again, but this time with a faded cream blouse that tugged a little too tight across her back. She held something small in her hand, a glint of silver that caught the morning sunday. "I want to show you something," she said. He followed her to the barn, where the new bed frame stood finished, corners sanded smooth, headboard carved with little sunbursts. She set the small object on the bed, a ring. Wyatt stared at it. It was bent slightly, the kind you find in the bottom of a drawer after years of forgetting it was there. Simple silver, no stone, wide band. "That was my mother's," she said. "She gave it to me before she passed. Told me to save it for the one person who didn't ask me to be less." Wyatt said nothing. He wasn't sure what this moment was yet. A test? A joke? A goodbye? Grace sat on the edge of the bed, cradling the ring in her massive palm like it might break. "I tried it on once, slipped it over my finger and it stuck halfway down. Couldn't get it off for a day. Damn thing didn't fit. Still doesn't." She looked up at him. "That ever happened to you? Try to force something to fit that just won't?" Wyatt thought of his family, the ranch, the expectations, the silence. "Yeah," he said softly. "More than once." She nodded. "I thought maybe, if I built the right house, wore the right dress, cooked the right meals, someone would look at me and see more than the size of me." He took a step closer. "And what do you see when you look at me?" Grace's eyes didn't waver. "Someone who flinched when the bed broke but didn't leave. Someone who still gets nervous around me but doesn't look away. I see someone," he said, voice steady now, "who makes me want to stop pretending." There it was. Not a proposal, not even a promise, but a crack in the armor that neither of them tried to hide anymore. Grace picked up the ring, turned it in her fingers, then set it back down. "I think," she said, "it's not about the ring fitting me. Maybe it's about whether I fit with someone else." Wyatt reached out, not for the ring, but for her hand. "We'll figure it out," he said, and this time, she let him hold on. Wyatt stayed, not because he had nowhere else to go, not because the bed was finally fixed or because Grace stopped wearing the dress. He stayed because when he woke up that morning, with the scent of wood smoke and coffee filling the air, it felt like he'd finally come home to somewhere that didn't ask him to be louder, tougher, or different than he was. Grace was already outside when he stepped onto the porch. She stood near the barn, sleeves rolled high, oil smudged on her forearms as she worked on a busted plow. The sun cut around her like it was drawn to her edges. He walked toward her, tools in hand, and for a moment, neither of them said a word. The quiet wasn't heavy now. It was full. She glanced at him and smirked. "You ever fix a plow?" "Not well," he said. "But I can hold things and look useful." "That's all I ask," she replied, and he caught the warmth behind her voice. They worked side by side, sweat on brows, fingers blistered, the rhythm of shared labor weaving a comfort they didn't have to explain. By midday, the plow stood upright, whole again. Wyatt wiped his hands and leaned against the fence. Grace stood next to him, their arms brushing. "I've been thinking," she said. "Dangerous," he murmured. She nudged him with her elbow. "I'm serious." "I'm listening." Grace turned toward him. "About what we're building here. It's not just fences and beds and plows. It's more than that, isn't it?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and nodded. "Yeah, it is. I never imagined this," she continued. "Not really. A man like you. Not laughing when the bed collapsed. Not backing off when I showed you the hard parts." He swallowed. "You didn't scare me, Grace. You made me feel seen." She was quiet a moment, eyes scanning the field like she was searching for something in the wheat. I don't want to scare people. I just got tired of being the one who had to bend. You don't have to bend, he said gently. She looked at him then, and something in her face cracked just a little. Enough for him to see the fear underneath all that strength. I'm not leaving, he said before she could ask. Not because of obligation, not because you've fed me or fixed a bed. I'm staying because I want to build something with you. Stronger than wood, stronger than steel. Her mouth parted slightly, eyes glassy now. You sure? She whispered. He stepped forward, took both her hands, kissed the calloused knuckles with care. I've never been more sure of anything. Grace didn't cry, but she leaned forward until her forehead pressed to his, and they stayed that way, breath mingling, hearts steady. Outside, the sky was quiet. The land was theirs, and whatever came next, they were going to face it together. The new bed didn't break. They tested it, gently at first, sitting side by side, boots off, shoulders touching. Then they lay down, facing each other in the dim light of Grace's oil lamp. The storm outside reduced to a distant memory. The mattress groaned, but it held, just like them. They didn't rush. There were no fireworks, no breathless declarations. Just two people learning each other's shapes with care, tracing scars and stories in the hush of night. Grace's fingers, rough from tools and timber, moved slow along Wyatt's jaw. He kissed her wrist, where the calluses softened. It wasn't perfect. Their elbows knocked, someone's knee cramped, but none of it mattered. When dawn slipped through the window like a blessing, they were tangled together beneath the quilt, her arm draped over his chest, his hand resting at the curve of her waist. They didn't speak right away. They didn't need to. Wyatt stared at the ceiling, not thinking, just breathing. It had been years since he'd woken up without the weight of leaving on his chest. No horse to saddle, no bags to pack, no lies to rehearse. Just her. Grace stirred and looked up at him. Bed didn't break, he smiled. Guess we built it right. She stretched, cat-like and powerful, and then rolled onto her back. First time I've ever shared a bed and felt more like myself after. He turned his head toward her. You always feel like too much? All the time, she said. Too tall, too strong, too blunt. But with you, I don't feel like I have to shrink. Wyatt shifted closer. And I don't feel like I have to stretch. She glanced sideways at him, lips twitching. That a short joke? He grinned. Maybe. They stayed like that a while, talking about nothing and everything. The farm, the repairs, what to plant next season, who owed who eggs. Grace mentioned expanding the pasture. Wyatt offered to design a better irrigation channel. It all sounded domestic, ordinary, like something people said after years together, not just a few days. But the truth was, they'd already crossed lifetimes of loneliness just to get here. Later, they made breakfast together, her at the stove, him chopping herbs. It was quiet, warm, filled with the kind of ease that usually took years to earn. When the food was ready, they ate on the porch, watching the sun rise over the soaked fields. Grace set her coffee down and said, I'm not asking for forever. Wyatt turned to her. I am. She blinked. I know it's fast, he said. But what we've built, this, us, it doesn't feel like the start of something. It feels like the middle of something we've both been walking toward for years. Grace looked down, then back up. Her smile didn't falter this time. All right then. She reached for his hand, and together, they watched the sun rise on their first morning, not as strangers, not as wanderers, but as something new, something unbreakable.